I used to think the most annoying thing about living in a quiet neighborhood outside Charlotte was the sound of leaf blowers at 7 in the morning. You know the kind. You're halfway through your first cup of coffee, try to enjoy a peaceful Saturday, and suddenly it sounds like somebody's preparing a runway for a commercial airliner. Turns out I had no idea how lucky I was back then, because one summer, my next-door neighbor managed to turn a simple driveway into a full-blown neighborhood war. And the crazy thing is, it all could have ended with one sentence. Just one. Sorry, it won't happen again. Instead, it ended with tow trucks, city inspectors, violation notices, and enough embarrassment to make a grown man avoid his own front yard. My name's Ethan, and at the time this happened, I'd been living in the same brick ranch house for almost 11 years. Nothing fancy, just a comfortable place on a quiet street where everybody mostly minded their own business. I worked from home, kept the lawn trimmed, waved to neighbors when I saw them, and generally stayed out of drama. I wasn't one of those people obsessed with property lines. I wasn't measuring grass height with a ruler or reporting trash cans to some neighborhood committee. But I did believe in something pretty simple. If something belongs to somebody else, you respect it. Apparently, my neighbor Randall had a different philosophy. Randall was one of those guys who somehow made every situation about himself. Loud truck, loud opinions, loud laugh. The kind of man who acted like every rule came with an invisible exception that applied specifically to him. His son, Mason, was even worse. Mid-20s, oversized pickup truck, baseball cap backwards 24 hours a day, speakers so loud you could hear him arriving before he turned onto the street. The first time Mason blocked my driveway, I honestly assumed it was a mistake. I came home early one afternoon after a meeting got canceled. As I turned into my street, I saw his giant black truck sitting diagonally across the bottom half of my driveway. At first, I actually laughed. I remember thinking, nobody parks like that on purpose. So I waited. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. 15. Finally, the garage door at Randall's house opened, and Mason came strolling out carrying a fast food bag. He looked directly at me sitting in my car and laughed. Actually laughed. Then he walked over to the truck like nothing was wrong. I rolled my window down and said, "Hey man, I need access to my driveway." He shrugged. "Relax, dude. I was only inside for a minute. Now maybe it's just me, but if somebody has been trapped in the street for 15 minutes because of your vehicle, you've officially exceeded the definition of a minute." Still, I stayed calm. I said, "No big deal. Just don't block it again." He nodded without really listening and drove away. 2 days later, the truck was back. Same spot, same angle, same attitude. That's when I decided to talk to Randall. And honestly, I walked over there fully expecting the situation to be resolved in about 30 seconds. I knocked on the door. He answered holding a beer. I explained what had happened. I even tried to keep things friendly. But the second I saw the smile on his face, I knew this wasn't going to be a normal conversation. He leaned against the doorframe and said, "Come on, Ethan. You're making a big deal out of nothing." I laughed awkwardly. I don't think asking somebody not to block my driveway is a big deal. Randall took a sip of beer and shrugged. "Mason's not hurting anything." That was the moment something shifted, because suddenly it wasn't about parking anymore. It was about respect. It was about a man standing on his porch telling me, with a smile on his face, that my property mattered less than his convenience. And standing there looking at him, I had a strange feeling this wasn't the first time he'd gotten away with something simply because nobody wanted the headache of pushing back. What I didn't know yet was that Randall had just made the most expensive decision of his entire summer. Looking back now, I think that conversation on Randall's porch was the exact moment the entire story changed direction. Because before that day, I was trying to solve a problem. After that day, I started paying attention to a pattern. See, some people break rules because they're careless. Some people do it because they're distracted. But then there are people who break rules because they genuinely believe nobody will stop them. Randall struck me as that third type. The more I thought about it, the more things started making sense. The neighbors across the street used to complain about his late-night parties. The family 2 houses down had mentioned him parking trailers halfway into the road. Everybody had stories. What nobody had was consequences. A few days later, I was sitting on my back patio drinking coffee when my elderly neighbor, Linda, walked by with her dog. She nodded toward Randall's house. Still dealing with the truck situation? I laughed. How did you hear about that? She smiled. Honey, this street runs on gossip and lawn maintenance. Then her smile faded. Just be careful. Randall hates being told no. That sentence stuck with me. Not because it scared me, because it explained everything. The following week, Mason blocked my driveway again. Not accidentally. Not partially. Completely. Like he was testing whether I'd actually do anything about it. This time I didn't walk next door. I didn't argue. I didn't knock on a door. Instead, I called the city's non-emergency line. The woman who answered sounded like she'd been handling neighborhood disputes for 20 years. I explained everything. The repeated blocking. The conversations. The photographs I'd started taking. She didn't sound surprised. Not even a little. Yes, sir, she said. A vehicle obstructing access to a residential driveway can be removed. That was it. Simple. Clean. No drama. No emotion in debate. Just facts. After hanging up, I wrote down the municipal code number she gave me. Then I called a local towing company. Not to schedule anything. Just to ask questions. Response times. Requirements. Procedures. The driver I spoke with sounded amused. You'd be surprised how often we get these calls. I believed him. By then, I'd completely stopped trying to change Randall or Mason. That wasn't my job. My job was protecting my property. And honestly, there's something strangely peaceful about reaching that realization. Once you stop arguing with unreasonable people, you free up a lot of mental energy. For the next couple of weeks, nothing happened. Then one Tuesday afternoon, everything happened. I pulled onto my street around noon, and there it was. The black truck, diagonal, blocking my driveway. Again, I remember sitting in my car and just laughing. Not angry laughter. The kind of laughter that happens when somebody walks directly into a situation they were warned about multiple times. I parked across the street, took photos from several angles, made one phone call. Then I waited. 23 minutes later, a tow truck rolled into the neighborhood. And let me tell you something. Reality moves fast when chains start rattling. The driver stepped out, looked at the truck, checked the address, and immediately got to work. No hesitation, no debate, no confusión. Apparently, blocking driveways wasn't exactly a rare event. Halfway through the hookup process, the garage door flew open. Mason came sprinting outside. What the hell are you doing? The tow driver barely looked at him, removing an illegally parked vehicle. Mason stared like he just heard somebody speaking another language. No, hold on. Then he finally noticed me standing across the street, and the expression on his face changed instantly. You know that moment when somebody realizes the consequences they've been laughing at are suddenly very real? That face. A few seconds later, Randall came charging out of the house. Red-faced, already angry, already looking for someone to blame. He marched straight toward me. Are you serious right now? I nodded. Completely. He pointed at the truck. You could have knocked on the damn door. The irony hit me so hard I almost laughed. For weeks, communication hadn't mattered. Now, suddenly communication was everything. I looked him directly in the eye. I did knock on your door. He opened his mouth, then stopped. Because he knew. He remembered. Every conversation. Every warning. Every chance I'd given them. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. The only sound was the tow truck tightening chains. Then Mason yelled from the driveway. Dad, they're taking it. The driver handed him paperwork. The impound information is right there. And just like that, the truck disappeared down the street. The entire neighborhood watched. Curtains moved. Front doors opened. People suddenly became very interested in their lawns. By evening, everybody knew what had happened. The release fee ended up costing several $100s. Not life-changing money, but enough to hurt. Enough to make a point. And honestly, I thought that would be the end of it. For about 2 weeks, it seemed like I was right. The truck stayed off my driveway. Randall avoided me. Mason parked legally. Peace returned. Then came Friday. I was getting ready to head to the grocery store when I glanced through my front window and stopped. The truck was back. Only this time, it wasn't partially blocking my driveway. It was completely blocking it. Every inch. I couldn't leave even if I wanted to. At first, I just stood there staring. Not because I was angry. Because I was genuinely confused. How do you get your vehicle towed and still decide this is a smart idea? Then it clicked. This wasn't parking. This was retaliation. The first tow had embarrassed them. The second parking incident was their way of reclaiming control. At least that's how they probably saw it. But here's the thing about pride. Pride makes people do incredibly expensive things. I walked into my kitchen, poured myself a cup of coffee, sat down at the table, and called the tow company. Again, the dispatcher answered. I gave my address. There was a brief pause. Then she sighed. Same truck? I couldn't help laughing. Same truck. We'll send someone. 25 minutes later, the tow truck returned like a sequel nobody wanted. Only this time, the situation became even better, because neither Randall nor Mason noticed. They'd apparently left in Randall's SUV earlier that evening. By the time they realized the truck was gone, the impound lot had already closed for the night, which meant overnight storage fees, additional charges, more paperwork, more embarrassment. The next morning, I was trimming hedges when Randall stormed across the lawn carrying a stack of documents. His face was red. His neck veins looked like they were trying to escape. This is harassment. I actually put the hedge trimmers down because I needed both hands free to process what I just heard. Harassment? You're targeting my family. I stared at him, then pointed toward my driveway. Your family keeps parking on my property. That answer somehow made him even angrier. And right there, standing in my front yard, Randall made the worst decision of the entire conflict. Because instead of accepting responsibility and moving on, he decided to fight back. And the moment he challenged the legality of the tow, he accidentally invited the city to start looking much closer at everything his family had been doing. That was when the real trouble began. What happened next is honestly the part people never believe when I tell this story. Not because it's unbelievable, because it's unbelievably avoidable. See, when Randall decided to challenge the tow through the city, he thought he was putting pressure on me. What he didn't understand was that government agencies tend to work a certain way. The moment you ask them to investigate something, they investigate everything. A week later, a city inspector showed up on our street. Then another one. Then a parking enforcement officer. At first, I thought they were just reviewing the towing complaint. Turns out they were reviewing a whole lot more. One afternoon, an inspector knocked on my door. Nice guy. Professional. He introduced himself and asked a few questions about the driveway issue. How long had it been happening? Did I have photographs? Had there been previous incidents? I told him yes. Then I brought out a folder, and I swear the look on his face was almost impressed, because by that point I had everything. Dates, photos, tow receipts, screenshots, notes. Nothing dramatic, just organized. The inspector spent several minutes looking through everything. Then he nodded. Thank you. This helps. A simple sentence. But I had a feeling it wasn't going to help Randall. Over the next several days, city vehicles kept appearing in the neighborhood. People noticed. Of course they noticed. This was suburban America. Half the entertainment came from watching things happen through living room windows. Linda called me one afternoon. You know, there are 3 inspectors on your street right now. I laughed. 3. She sounded delighted. The entire neighborhood was treating it like a live television series. Then the notices started arriving. Apparently, some of the photographs connected to the towing dispute showed Mason's truck extending onto the public sidewalk. Not by much, but enough. And once city officials started paying attention, they found other issues. Repeated obstruction violations, improper parking, access interference. Things that had probably gone unnoticed for years suddenly became impossible to ignore. One morning I looked outside and saw Randall standing in his driveway, holding paperwork. A lot of paperwork, the kind nobody wants. He wasn't yelling anymore, wasn't acting tough anymore, wasn't smiling anymore. He just looked tired. And honestly, that was the moment I knew the fight was over. Not because he lost money, because the confidence was gone. The belief that consequences only happened to other people had finally disappeared. The total fines ended up somewhere around several $100s. Add in both towing incidents. Add in storage fees. Add in administrative costs. Nobody ever told me the exact number. But based on what I heard from a couple of neighbors, the final damage was enough to make Randall furious for months. The funny part is that none of it had anything to do with me anymore. I wasn't filing complaints. I wasn't making calls. I wasn't pushing for punishment. The system was simply doing what systems do once enough evidence exists. That's something people misunderstand all the time. Consequences feel personal when they finally arrive. But most of the time, they're not personal at all. They're just delayed. After the citations showed up, the neighborhood changed almost overnight. Mason started parking legally. Every single time. No exceptions. No excuses. No dramatic speeches. Just legal parking. Amazing how quickly behavior improves when it starts affecting somebody's wallet. Randall changed too. He stopped hanging around the front yard. Stopped making comments. Stopped trying to dominate every interaction. For months afterward, he'd glance away whenever we crossed paths. The man who once acted like rules were optional suddenly wanted nothing to do with attention. And eventually, peace returned. Real peace. The kind that comes when everybody understands exactly where the boundaries are. Sometimes I'd pull into my driveway after work and look at that empty stretch of concrete where Mason's truck used to sit. And I'd think about how absurd the entire situation had been, because it never needed to happen. Not one tow, not one citation, not one argument. The solution had always been sitting right there from the beginning. A little respect. That's all. One simple conversation. One small acknowledgement that somebody else's property mattered. Instead, pride took over. And pride has a funny way of turning small problems into expensive disasters. You know, when people hear this story, they usually split into two groups. One group says I should have called the tow truck the very first time. The other group says I should have kept giving them chances. Honestly, I understand both arguments. Neighbor conflicts are uncomfortable. Nobody wants tension 10 feet from their front door. Nobody wants to feel like they're creating drama. But here's what I learned. Every time you tolerate a boundary being ignored, you unintentionally teach the other person that the boundary doesn't really exist. And once people learn there are no consequences, they start treating your patience like permission. That lesson changed the way I deal with conflict. Not just with neighbors, with everyone. You don't need to be aggressive. You don't need to be angry. You don't need revenge. You just need consistency. Because boundaries without enforcement are really just suggestions. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is calmly refuse to let somebody else's entitlement become your problem. Now here's the question I want to leave with you. If you were in my position, how many chances would you have given them? Would you have called the tow truck after the first warning? Would you have kept trying to keep the peace? Or do you think I went too far and should have handled it differently? Let me know down in the comments, because I've heard every possible opinion on this story, and honestly, I think reasonable people can disagree. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who's ever dealt with a difficult neighbor. And remember, sometimes the biggest problems don't start with lawsuits, property disputes, or major betrayals. Sometimes they start with a single truck parked in the wrong driveway.